Welcome back. I'm here today with DeBevoise. Aaron is one of those true entrepreneurs who has taken visions and helped to create new companies and also solve problems in the world today. Aaron, welcome to today's show.
Thank you very much, Alan.
So Aaron, I think on this show we have these entrepreneurs come in and everyone has a different story to tell. And why don't you give us some background of how you came to be where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I won't start from the beginning, of time, but I went to Williams College, where my father went, and my father was very entrepreneurial in mind, but never really did anything about it, in the sense of he's worked in oil shipping and so forth. And when I went to Williams, it was the kind of education that would be one that teaches you to think, take everyone's perspective into account, and actually come up with a unique approach to all types of problems or ideas, from art to economics, and I've had a fascination with science in general. And actually, at 19, I had started a company with my father to give him this kind of opportunity for both of us to really connect, called C-Flix, which was the idea of Napster, kind of really crunching the last mile between colleges and the outside world, right? And the downloading of music and so forth. And that ended up being an amazing experience where I learned one major thing that made me an entrepreneur in my mind, which was I was very good at hearing problems, whether it was about me personally or about the company itself or about outside world, and seeing past it, right? Not letting it affect us in a negative way, but be a positive event. So think about, well, what are the alternatives? Or how do we move past it? It never took me down, right? And then I went on from there to basically work at a very traditional business, JP Morgan Investment Banking in New York, that taught me great work ethic, but also taught me everybody in the world is really a hard worker, and it was not the case, and so I had to de-learn that, and move. But JP Morgan gave me an amazing opportunity to go to Los Angeles and work in the financing division for film, and where I did $3 billion in loans, senior secured debt, where we were the only ones that understood the language of film. So someone would say negative cost. Right, you would be like, what is that? You go, well, it's the negative of a film and the cost of that negative, right, from a film perspective, not negative costs, where the accounting team would say, what does that mean? But what it taught me was mathematical approaches to something that's very artistic, right? That watching a film, you would never understand the math, right, behind how do you predict that we will be 99.7% accurate that when we invest in something. That's what the bank required. And we never lost a dollar in 30 years. I joined it for 5 years of that 30, but it was never, or 3 to 5, can't remember how long it was. And we invested in Superman, Dark Knight, biggest films in current day, right? And so it taught me basically portfolio theory and what they call Monte Carlo analysis. And so each of these steps I then move on to will teach me things in my life that had a shocking ending to it. But you go, so my next event was, I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I didn't know what it quite meant, just like I knew I wanted to go into Hollywood, right? But I didn't know quite what was available, right? Once you get in it, you see all sorts of opportunity. So I just dove in, right? And that's typically what they'll say about entrepreneurs. In order to start, you got to start, right? That's it. So as you figure it out along the way, that's the risk taker, right? And so I just started a production company doing documentary filmmaking because I wanted to learn the backbone of what I was financing, right? To really see it from the other side, multiple perspective. And I partnered with my uncle, Alan DeBevoise, at that moment. And we did 3 documentary films with Red Bull and Lionsgate around the idea of action sports, but the athletes were a character, the scene was a character, Japan, Africa, whatever, and the event was a character, right? Someone kayaking in the Zambezi River when it was at its highest point in history. That was one we did was the most famous kayaker in the world. So that was 2 years where I didn't make any money, poor as could be. Made sure my wife didn't understand that, but I said, it was like an amazing learning experience. Moving from that to seeing, well, as I was there, it gave me time to read and digest what's going on in the world, what happened previously in history, watching stuff from like Fog of War about, how Bay of Pigs happened, and perception was always critical, right, in the results or actions people took. Learning from my uncle and his history at TCI as the head of TCI Investments, learning from John Malone. He was telling me a lot of what John Malone taught. And we then decided to be operational, jump into something completely operational new with Machinima.
So I need to take a quick break.
Yeah.
I'm visiting here with Aaron DeBevoise, and we've been talking about establishing the background and the history of bringing up to date, getting current with what Aaron's working on today. Aaron is one of those true entrepreneurs. Doesn't work on one company, but multiple at a time. Yeah. Aaron, we'll be right back after these messages.
I love fishing, with my family.
I think it would be easier to use a net.
It was so much fun.
The times when we are together, it makes it all the more worth it.
Having Dad teach them how to cast a fly rod, and
as long as we're doing stuff together, we're having fun.
Some people see a father and a son fishing together, while others see a succession plan.
Welcome back. I'm here today with Aaron DeBevoise, and he's one of these true entrepreneurs who is working to change the face of the landscape of the world and how we live our lives. Aaron, you were establishing background, and before the break, we talked about this company, Machinima,
Right.
which I understand helped to set the foundation for this next chapter.
Yeah.
Can we pick up from there?
Yeah, I think the end of all of this is to result in something that what you just said is how do you find the true drive of an entrepreneur in yourself and others, right? And so this experience at Machinima was just additive to other experiences, even though, and I'll explain a little bit about it, but at the end it really became who am I as a person, and what am I driven by, right, and not driven by. So when we launched Machinima, it was originally thought of as a technology opportunity where rendering real-time imagery, right, animation, right, was typically not a real-time process. It was a very complicated process. You had to be a mathematician, understand physics, and understand how to create animation using Maya and so forth. That was the founding CTO of a company called Wavefront Technologies had reached out to us, myself and Alan, saying there are kids around the world rendering animation in real time. And you're saying, what are you talking about? They said, oh, this is not possible. It's the holy grail of animation. And Alan had worked on the original Tron and at Robert Abel and Associates and understood what this meant. And it was game engines that were doing the physics and mathematics and the imagery on behalf or for the creator. And the creator was really puppeteering, right, the characters, not having to worry about or think about the other stuff, right? So when a bullet hit the shoulder of another soldier, right, the animator typically would have to figure out how that person falls based on the velocity of that bullet and the weight and so forth, right? But in this case, it already happened. So you just have to create the scene. So they would literally have 5 or 6 people around the room and say, everybody position and go, right? And that was same as traditional filmmaking. So it democratized animation, right? And then we remember the days when John Lasseter was around, he's still around, but he's saying before animation was big, pitching animation and everyone saying it's too cold, right? Never gonna work in Hollywood. And then they showed the lamps of Pixar, right? Where the one lamp tilted to show an emotional state of sadness, right? And they said, oh my God, geometric shapes can have emotion, right? And it was a visual, and the biggest, winner in total film has been the animated category, right? Big budget animation. And so it was interesting. We thought of it as a place for that to happen. The revolution, or not evolution, but revolutionize animation, democratize. It ended up being too small of an opportunity, and that's one of the things that I was learning as an entrepreneur is, yes, some things you dream of may not be big enough to happen, or they're too complex for the moment in time, or many factors. So we really saw an opportunity with the launch of YouTube, right, and its growth, right, over time. When Google bought it, to say most people were using super syndication as a method, every single video network. We said, why don't we focus just on YouTube, where we can learn it, understand it at its depth, at its core, and really leverage it to launch many companies similar in nature to Machinima as a programming brand, the way that broadcast had reinvented radio and cable reinvented broadcasts, right? More and more channels, more opportunities. Hence, we moved to just YouTube in 2007. 2007. It was 5 of us, and we grew it from 5 to 250 people, with 150 under myself in terms of 8 direct reports, and that was a completely new thing for me. But the people we hired were really interesting in the sense that the backgrounds were not about their resume or not about what they had done, but who they are, right? It was a lot of young gamers, right, that we hired. Maybe I think the average age, not usually using age as a measure, but saying the average age here was 24 in Machinima. And go ahead.
Yeah. So Aaron, we're running up against the break here.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
and so we'll take a quick break. We're visiting with Aaron DeBevoise, and we've been talking about the history and the development of the companies. And when we get back, I'm going to have Aaron jump into this next segment and talking about the future of the internet, the way we live, and the greatest problem today of what's happening in media. So we'll be right back after these messages.
When I grow up, I want to work with very successful people.
I want to advise people so that they can pay less tax.
Hang out with my clients on the golf course.
Fishing.
And on their private yachts.
They will all be my friends too.
I want to work with the VCs who will fund the next Fortune 500 company.
When I grow up, I want to be just like my dad.
Money won't buy you happiness in life, but we can help take care of your financial affairs so you can focus on what's really important. Welcome back. I'm here visiting today with Aaron DeBevoise, and we've been talking about the history, the background of really, Aaron, when I sit down and visit with you,
right,
you represent the typical entrepreneur. They're individuals that are currently pushing boundaries. So you were in this company, and all of a sudden you saw with YouTube, and you saw something missing there.
Right.
And typically a true entrepreneur will say, what if the model we're on is wrong?
Right.
So what did you see wrong with where you're at and the problems that needed to be solved?
Right. Yeah, well, I think, I started to realize, taking on what the CEO's vision of my uncle in this case, at a different moment in his life, was not the right perspective for me, right? What I was doing at Machinima, when we grew it to 250 million uniques from 0, we asked 250 venture capitalists to invest. We got 1 yes, 249 no's. Right, so no one really understood what we were saying or believed in it.
Don't feel bad. Scott Cook of Intuit didn't believe in the Google model.
Right.
So.
And I, by the way, had an opportunity to sell YouTube to Lionsgate.
Yeah.
And I said, why would anyone want to do this? Mm-hmm. Right, YouTube. Yeah. This is, and I was so wrong. Right, I've been plenty wrong, and that's actually the key to success.
But isn't that true? Yeah. Where we learn when we make our mistake, we learn something in the process.
Yeah, I think there were 3 messages generally that I learned during that process, which was, really failure is success, is learning, right? And without it, you're never going to succeed or overcome, right? Or go faster or grow bigger. If everything works out, you just get sideswiped. And that happened every day, every month, every year, every company. At the end of this journey of machinima, right, and what started a new journey in my life, I had been involved in the creation of, or investment of, or advisory of at least 15 companies across YouTube. Now, the core set was 3 or 4, including Style Hall and Dance On. More Style Hall I founded with Alan as a co-founder, and Stephanie Horbaczewski, who was the current CEO, and we had sold that company. But each company had the same stages. It was like growing up as a kid. It was literally the pimply faced teenage stage. There was the young 20s stage, and a little bit wild, and then you had to slow it down and figure out how to structure it so that for growth. And it was really unique to learn those events that occur that were actually regular, so that you didn't find yourself in this position of being, too worried about any single events, right? But also always questioning, which was kind of ingested into me through Alan, through John Malone when Alan was at TCI, of questioning what if we're wrong? Are they, what would we be doing otherwise? Or what is someone else might be doing? And what if the people that we typically look at and say, or companies, we didn't believe in an action they might have taken, like what Google didn't buy Netflix, right? And we thought that was really just not the right move for them. What if that was exactly what they wanted to happen? What would it mean, right? And so I really took that, and after having launched a bunch of companies and been at Machinima for, I think, almost 8 years, 7 years, and said in one night at 4 in the morning, one morning, days start to mix, so and you're an entrepreneur, is that I looked at, I had seen Transcendent Man, which is Ray Kurzweil's documentary about how he wanted to revive his father through computer technology, using data, nanotechnology, processing, and with artificial intelligence. Feeding a computer everything his dad read, saw, said, and trying to make it so that the computer could answer as if it was his father, right? And seeing the problems that existed, which was AI is really difficult, right? Is that getting the essence of computers are terrible at seeing the difference between a dog and a skunk by the visuals, right? It knows through text if you tell it. And I started to look at, well, isn't that a problem that YouTube and Facebook and all these big mega platforms, right? The way that you would look at Comcast in the past was a mega platform. These platforms were unbelievable in scale, way bigger than Comcast, right? Way bigger than CBS. CBS had no meaning in 90% of the places that YouTube existed. 80% of its views were outside of the US, right? The reason HBO created its shows the way it did was to hit all the US audience demographics, right? Female, male, young, old, family, right? You go, that is no longer true. With Machinima, we focused on male, 18 to 34, and we got some other audiences, but we got 250 million people. It was the ultimate comic book niche that was no longer niche, right? But what did that mean? And what we thought it meant was cable would reinvent itself. The new cable, the future model of cable, what Hulu was doing mixed with what others.
Yeah, as we move into technological advances in cable and the video, and where do you see all this going then?
Yeah, I think
what's this next phase for us?
The biggest moment in my that now is defining who I'm finding out who I really am and what's really going on, is understanding that idea of redefining cable and media, right, alone is not big enough for Google, right? Is not big enough for Facebook, right? They're driven by changing the entire world. And I started to think about moments, right, that happened in the past that were like that. Railroad, the car, the printing press. And in fact, the printing press was something that Chris Albrecht from Wired magazine, that writes about the long tail, right, wrote the book Long Tail, had said at an event, that YouTube is bigger than the printing press, it will be. And it was a little bit off the wall for me, even after being there so many years. But I really was being driven by engineers at YouTube, not creators, right? Creators were just uploading, but everyone was uploading. It wasn't just a core popular group the way Hollywood works, right? Where as a group of directors or writers, you'd say it was almost 1 billion people. And by the time I realized it, it was 1 billion, which to me was told by a person named Jason Silva that is actually the youngest futurist I know, and probably Ray Kurzweil is like the next Ray Kurzweil on Nat Geo and other things. He taught me, he said, Abundance was a book being written, had just come out, and said abundance was about this idea that the abundance of technology, the abundance of people, the abundance of the future is an exciting moment and is actually going to be better than the past in terms it's not going to be harmful, because that abundance, and if we unleash the connectivity of those people, the power of it, that it would actually say that the innovation, the pace of innovation would accelerate faster than Moore's law, faster than exponential growth. It would be logarithmic or something that would step change it. And we now look back in history and say, wait a second, that's what happened. Yeah. It was never exponentially smooth. It was always, well, the car came, and then it was a little bit like TMZ when a celebrity went crazy. It was, spike in traffic, and then they had programming.
So Aaron, I need to, we're up against the break. I'm visiting with Aaron DeBevoise, and we're talking about the next big movement in the technology here, and it's focused around people, data, and media. And so we'll be right back after this message, and Aaron will give us a prediction for the future. Yeah. We'll be right back after this messages.
He's the world's most trustworthy man. Tax filing deadlines are scheduled around his vacation calendar. The IRS agent who audited his client apologized.
I don't always advise people on their taxes, but when I do, I save them every penny legally possible.
GrowCo CPAs and Advisors.
Come to GrowCo and stay wealthy, my friend.
Welcome back. I'm here today with Aaron DeBevoise, and we've been talking about essentially what the future for the media is. Mm-hmm. And Aaron, you've outlined some things, some clues that we have about technology has brought people, data, and media together. What do you see this all leading up to? What's the next big thing that we're going to see in the transition of technology?
Well, I mentioned a 4 in the morning moment, and that moment was really asking myself, like I mentioned, it was what if we're wrong, right? And what did that mean? And I said, I looked at it and said, YouTube, whenever you talk to someone, or Facebook or anything like it, that scale has never been, it's the largest video offering, right, or platform in history of mankind, right, period. And you would say, that's extremely difficult to organize, right? How do you know how to feed what video to which person, right? It's not like programming where there's, on television, where there's 24/7, and that's the biggest, most opportunity you have, right, is 24 hours a day of programming. Here, it was endless, infinite, and as it got to 1 billion people, which is something Jason Silva talks about as a major moment in change, right, where you can no longer act the same way as you once had if you had 5 people to serve, and now you have 1 billion, you're going per month. What did it mean? And what it really meant is, well, why are they doing this, and how are they organizing it? Google, right? And what I saw was that we, as a company, were averaging everything. And what happens when you average everything? It looks average, right? No matter what. If it's really average, you're okay. If it's not, you're eliminating the bad and eliminating the good. So I looked at one of the good assets that we had in the past and saw a very pivotal moment, right, that many people were finding all sorts of assets that we would consider good, bad, different, whatever, not ever make it in Hollywood, extremely important to them around the world, right? And meaning I had an asset that had 27 million views I had no idea about because I was averaged into everything. And it was from 2007, and it had gained over many years, right? And that was because of the growth of opportunity, people, and the underlying data being used to predict what does a consumer want when they type in this case, the name of a game, right, or something like that. Well, that moment, I also saw that travel had increased 300% last year. I mean, in that current year, and 300%. But it wasn't just Google; it was on YouTube and Google. YouTube was the place where they found where they want to go visually, and Google was data around pricing. How much the flight would cost, how much the hotel would cost. So it was being used, it was a utility engine, both of them. They weren't entertainment engines. Entertainment was one utility. It was a lean back moment where you wanted to just watch something, but entertainment was one of, and that was the question, one of what, right, and why? And so we really found when Google had bought Freebase, Freebase was a topic engine of 83 million topics in the world. And it was at this point where you kind of look at it and say, what are they trying to do? What is Uber trying to do when it starts to expand beyond the black car service? It was pretty big, good enough for a financial win. And I started to understand that entrepreneurs that were getting the future were looking past the economics, right? Understanding they already had an economic model, which Google needed from the 2002 moment that made them the second largest market cap company in the world with local advertising targeted. You'd say, to fuel what they actually are going to do. That people were looking at 20-year trajectories to determine what they were going to do today. And Google had embraced that. And they're in their 18th year of that 20-year run. So I said, there's going to be a massive change because of the connected world. That ultimately says, we can predict the future, right? And if we can predict the future based on data, right? Then what's critical when you talk about what everyone in San Francisco is talking about and no one in LA understands, right? The Internet of Things or the semantic web. Most people mean in here, at least in LA, if they even know what that is, or New York or wherever, is that they mean the things, right? The phone delivers information. Can you make a thing, right? Nike makes its bracelets, it delivers billions of data points. Mm-hmm. But the answer is who controls that world? And those people that control that world, can they do something good with it, right? And the way to control it is context, right, which is data. Mary Meeker just said it, is that context is critical or nothing works, right? But that the image versus text, visuals, transfer 10,000 times more data to a human being for the same given amount of time versus text, right? And Eric Schmidt had told me this in 2010, said that the reason they had bought YouTube was that visuals will overcome text, right? And then we just saw it in Paris with the cartoonists. It was a bad thing, but that the cartoon had transcended language, right? And that it was visual. You're going data at 1 billion with the understanding of what the intent of human beings are, seeing something like 158 people's lives in terms of, like, if you looked at age 0 to 80 as a lifespan and all the activities someone would take, that amount of activities times 158 are happening every day on YouTube, right? You're going, that's what I've measured. It may be a little off, a little right or wrong, but it's close, right? And you're seeing that happen in a day. What's happening? You're actually compressing time, right? Because you're seeing 158 lives make choices, right? And proactive choices. Anyway, so what do you do with that information? Hardest thing that everybody's tried to accomplish is prediction, right? And doing that through, and then eventually on top of that, automation, right? Which is what we work on all day, is predictive analytics that allow us to automate processes. But you need an underlying business model to grow it, to hit a different objective, which is change the world, right?
Yeah. Aaron, this is phenomenal. And if I could just say it in one context, that the next big phase is going to be more with artificial intelligence of running the business models and delivering things in a more efficient manner. for us.
I think one of the things is, yes, that's a lot of people believe like what Amazon's doing with local and all that, but I think right now is the beginning of Web 4.0, which is the intelligent era, right? A little bit like every revolution we have, right? With automobile or with the Renaissance or all that, different time periods where all of a sudden we become more intelligent, was that the last 20 years was data gathering, right? Solely. Whatever mechanism allowed you to gather data, and look at Google, right? It was a lot of different offerings. Gmail, Gmaps, G+, whatever, right? And then YouTube. And Amazon, same thing, Twitter, same thing, but what they got right, Amazon and Twitter and YouTube, although that doesn't mean I predict those all are the successors, differently than Facebook, was they thought about you every time. You as an individual, how many choices do you make per month on average on YouTube? 250, right? When Machinima was around, we were the #1 most engaged network in the world, voted by ComScore and Adweek, right? At that point, that was 10 views per unique. We weren't taking into account the groundswells of actions that were happening outside of the categories that people typically think are popular: music, gaming, movies, TV. What was happening with when you broke your arm that you needed to search and say, hey, what do I do if I can't get to a hospital right away? And you find a visual versus text. Which one are you probably going to watch? And that visual is 30 seconds, right? Or read it. It's clearly visual. And YouTube, for the first time in Google's history around search, was a circular internal system, right? Meaning everything led to another video within the system. Whereas Google always was required, unfortunately for them, but it worked, right? Is that it was required to lead out into the world of the web, right? Lead you to Home Depot, lead you to wherever you needed to go. Here it's leading you within YouTube. So I believe they have given out the algorithm, just like Facebook, just like others, for what they used to call the knowledge graph, right? Which was the human action graph. And then there's the social graph and the real-time graph with Twitter, both, but it's a little skewed celebrity, right? And not normal, everyday person. If you combine all that, what do you build, right? And that's called the human intent graph, in my mind. That's what I'm working on. But you need an underlying business, and I believe that's the answer to solving all of what Muhammad Yunus was trying to do with microlending, which was solving poverty, right, for the purposes of innovation. We will be at an exponential growth with the biggest step change, where we measure that from, in the history of the world, right, in the next 2 years.
That's quite a bit there, Aaron, but it helps to put in perspective that we're now transitioning into the next big change. Aaron, It's been a pleasure having you on the show today.
Yes.
Been visiting here with Aaron DeBevoise. He's a true entrepreneur pushing boundaries, and he's outlined the next big step with technology and the internet. Aaron, thanks for being on today's show.
Thank you very much, Alan. Yes.
Well, thanks again for joining us here on America Dreams. Stay tuned and tune in here next week right here on the station.